Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. Been a little while. Didn't get an episode out the door last week. The time bandits have been relentless, and it's been very difficult for me to work on anything that's not immediately related to trucking or my family. Just been swamped. But thank you for your patience. Today's episode will be very highly enjoyable for those of you who pay attention to the labor market economic side of trucking. I'm going to be speaking with a gentleman who used to work at a state level employment agency of sorts, helping those who are unemployed find jobs, find them training, place them in positions, and find funding for them through the government. And he's going to explain to us how all of that works and contributes to something I bang on about quite a bit, which is driver retention and the fake driver shortage narrative. A whole book could be written on that particular subject, but we'll set that aside for now. I have a few more shows recorded and hopefully find some time to edit them and get them to you soon. I've got a few writing ideas. Again, when the time bandits let up and I get the chance to sit down and bang some things out, I have a few things in the works. And it looks like it's going to be slowing down here at work along with the rest of the economy. So maybe you'll be seeing and hearing more from me soon. I know things are tough out there. Every time I log on Twitter, it seems like there's more bad news from the economy as a whole and in trucking in particular. And I hope this episode, if anything, goes some way to letting our government representatives know that they don't need to be spending any more money training more truck drivers. We're awash in them, and every time the economy shakes out like this, truckers are the ones that get hit. Our wages are artificially suppressed, and the whole thing needs to stop. Joe's going to shine a light on one particular pathway and how this works. And I hope you guys enjoy the show. As always, I don't charge. I have no sponsors. This show is a gift to you, my fellow drivers, and anybody else that's interested in listening to this. All that I ask is that you pass it around, share it. If you know another trucker, give it to them, tell them about it, point them to my show. This is for you guys, something to listen to while you're going down the road. I hope you all enjoy it, and here we go with Joe. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord. This is my voice. The other voice you're going to hear today is of a friend I've met online, become well acquainted with. His name is Joe, and he has some insight into a particular subject matter I bang on about quite a bit, which is the retention problem in trucking and how that is affected in various ways. Joe works in local government and has spent some time in placing people in jobs in various human resources positions, and it's going to help us figure out what's going on with where the government keeps trying to force bodies into the bottom end of the trucking business. Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Gord. How's it going, brother?
Oh, not too bad. Sunday, got my coffee on. I see you have yours as well.
That's
Cheers.
right.
Cheers.
Never a day without.
No, sir.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure listening to you talk. I mean, my connection to this world of trucking is pretty tangential. You know, I mean, I've never driven commercially. I only know a couple of people in my life that have had commercial driver's licenses, but you know, it's clearly such an important area to have examination, and it's great that you're bringing light to it.
Right. Well, we do eat. We do like our morning coffee and maybe the cream and sugar that goes in it. And all of that stuff at some one point or another was on a truck or involved in supply chains in some description. So I had a weird interaction yesterday online. Some random woman who decided to express that she wished for Elon Musk to automate all the trucks and put all the truckers out of work, which was hilarious because I went and looked at her profile and she said she was a labor lawyer. So, if if you want all of your potential clients to be put out of a job, that's an interesting logical supposition.
It's as our a wise man once said, these people are sick. And they are. These people are sick.
So where are you joining us from this morning?
I'm in the Baltimore metro area, and at the moment, I'm in my little home office with guitars on the wall and a lot of clutter in the corner.
Yeah, many such cases. I'm in my back room here, and there's kids' clothes and boots, and we haven't transitioned from winter wardrobe yet. So we're in that shoulder season where we don't know if it might yet snow one more time. So a lot of that stuff hasn't been put away. Although I
Yeah,
imagine Baltimore being quite a bit south of where I am, you guys are pretty solidly into spring now.
yeah. I think we're so they one of the ways to look at climate is crop planting zones, and I'm pretty sure we're too south of you. I think I know like there's like a bump that goes up over into the middle of south central Pennsylvania, and we're kind of in that same zone. So yeah, spring seems to hit us a good bit sooner than you're in what central New York. I know. I remember Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah, so I'm near Ithaca, which is
Ithaca, that's it. It's Western New York. Okay.
basically almost smack in the middle. I'm 65 miles southwest of Syracuse and
I got you.
26
Yeah, I got
miles
family
from
in Syracuse.
yeah, I'm 26 miles from Cortland, which is the hometown of Mr. Ronnie James Dio. As a guitarist and musician, I'm sure you're well familiar. We're okay, so you're in Baltimore. Are you from there originally? Are you born and raised? Like, what's your life story?
Oh gosh, my life story. Well, I'm from not far from here, South Central Pennsylvania originally, so sort of near the state capital, that area, and then went to school in the western part of Pennsylvania. Ended up here because this is where my lady wife found employment in this area, and I eventually found employment here too. To a great extent, my life story is trying to figure out what I'm going to do with myself.
Many
I
such
spent long
cases.
periods. I've spent long periods partially employed or unemployed, as the case may be. And yeah, the thing that finally got my mind on track was realizing that struggle should define what I do in some way. That like that is my calling, is helping others with matters related to employment. And so that's why I ended up in originally I was a little like a little nonprofit helping people find work. And that was after a rather, like, probably my longest period of unemployment ever. I got laid off from a very well paying job that was like soul crushing. It was like the ultimate in like trade off, like, oh man, this pays pretty well, but it also makes me like every day I go to work, I'm like with the Princess Bride. I've just taken a year off your life. Anyway, I went from that to working at this little nonprofit where it was absolute joy to go every day. I was helping people get enough to eat. I was helping people look for work. I was helping people apply to jobs and that kind of thing. And that's when I realized I was like, this is what I was meant to do. Like my struggles define my past struggles to figure out what I'm going to do, define helping or define my mission, my calling to help people find work. And so I did that for a little while at this little charity. And then after I did that for a while, I realized, well, I got to make more money than the nonprofit sector can make me. Because when you're doing actual charity helping people, the nonprofit sector is not very lucrative. You have to find some kind of boutique cause in the nonprofit area. I don't know, some kind of like awareness research or something like that. Anyway, so that's when I decided, I'll move into like local government, and that's how I've kind of landed where I am now.
There's one old adage there I thought of immediately. I don't know, maybe it's just an old cliche, but those who cannot do teach.
I never thought about looking at it that way, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can't figure out how to do it yourself, you might as well teach other people how to not do it.
when I was younger, I guess this speaks to the particular case I was from. And, my parents split up when I was a kid. And my mom probably wasn't the most functional person on earth. You find that a lot of people who become social workers came from backgrounds where they needed social workers around.
Yep.
And we'll leave it at that.
Well, I
It
studied psych in graduate school. That was what I studied was various. Well, yeah, I wasn't studying the head doctor kind of psych, but I went to school with a lot of people that did. And yeah, it is absolutely true that a lot of the people that are going into being head doctors, they got their own issues. And the upside of that is they are part of their training is that they're in therapy from day one while they're studying to become therapists. They're all supposed to be in therapy as well. So
it's interesting you mentioned that when you hang around on Twitter and certain parts of the internet long enough, you run into fringy dissident communities and fun little corners where you get everything under the sun. And there's quite a few people who are pretty skeptical of therapy and think that it's a replacement for other older and traditional forms of kind of mental health social assistance that's based in a faith community. You know what I'm saying?
oh yeah.
And I don't know what you do. You have any opinions on that?
Well, I am a practicing Catholic. I'm bad at it, but I'm still practicing. So I'm definitely receptive to the sort of the tension between the two. I think anytime you try to replace faith or a faith experience with something that isn't really grounded in any kind of faith or theology or anything, I think you're going to run into trouble. So if you try to make science into your religion, if you try to make therapy into your religion or whatever, you're going to run into trouble because you're essentially trying to use the wrong tool for the job. I mean, one of my favorite lessons was my old scoutmaster back when I was a little kid said he saw me. We were building birdhouses, and he saw me hitting something with the heel of my hand. He saw me hitting the wood with it. He grabbed my wrist. He said, "Joe, never use your hand as a hammer." He was this very Renaissance man kind of guy. He was not a contractor. He was a carpenter. He was like a craftsman carpenter, but also had gone to school for for how to teach English and stuff like that. What he meant was, yeah, literally don't use your hand as a hammer, but he also meant use the right tool for the job. So it's in the literal sense, but also figuratively. I mean, if you're trying to resolve issues of the sort of the spirit or the soul or whatever you want to call that, then you should apply religion to that. But if you're trying to resolve issues like that, there's no reason to or you're going to get worse results if you apply religious or not. I'm sorry, not religious, therapeutic and scientific principles to matters of the spirit and soul. You're going to run into trouble with that because it's just not the right tool for the job. And in terms of therapy, I'm sorry, I have a lot of thoughts. I do have a lot of thoughts on this, Gord.
Go
But
for
in
it.
terms of therapy, I went to school, like I said, with a lot of people that were studying to become therapists. I never took any of those classes. I wasn't smart enough to get into them, to be honest with you. Therapy at its core, the most effective kind of therapy, from what I understand, is essentially the good therapist or whatever clinician or whatever is a mirror that reflects what they see and hear from the client, patient, whatever the right word for it is these days. They're reflecting, and in seeing the reflection of oneself, that the patient, again, I don't know the politically correct term for this anymore. For a while, it was patient, then it was client, then it was consumer, which that's,
Oh,
yeah,
geez. Yeah, the
yeah, tell me about
the
it.
implications of that choice of term are terrible.
Yeah. But anyway, but the idea is that person by seeing the reflection of who they are, they will, through their innate goodness, improve, and it'll help them to resolve their issues. So, and it's not just, obviously not repeating what someone says to you in this is again in my limited understanding of like quote unquote good therapy, but it's that someone will vomit forth like a thousand words about what they're struggling with, and the good therapist takes that and condenses it into like maybe 20 words. So now instead of this overwhelming volume of information, the patient can say, they can wrap their head around 20 words or maybe 10 words, that allows them to better understand what they're feeling, thinking, etc. I do think there's a lot more therapy in a good hard day's work than there is in an hour of talking to somebody, because I've done both, and I'll tell you, it's a lot more effective to just go to work and do your job.
I can see that. It also depends on your job.
That's true.
Being a truck driver that spends most of my time alone, I will admit that over many years of this, too much time in your own head can also be something of a problem.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I think
absolutely.
I think many of my comrades might also admit that. Yeah, that's interesting. Therapist as like zip file or tweet,
Yep,
just condensing. So you went and studied psychology, and
yep.
you eventually get married. You eventually end up in Baltimore Metro, and eventually end up in employment assistance and nonprofits. What did you find there?
What I eventually ended up in, after working in the little nonprofit thing, I got into local government, and I was in workforce development. That's the term. So if anybody in your audience wants to learn about this stuff, wants to see what's going on in their own state, wants to know, and well, not even necessarily, I mean, yeah, it's state, but there's state workforce development associations, there's local workforce development departments. I think every state does it a little bit differently, but that's the keyword search is workforce development. It was I don't know, compared to the breakneck pace of helping people at the charity that I was working at, it slowed down. Like just the volume that was expected of me was so much less, shockingly less, to be honest with you. And part of that might be the quote unquote labor market that we're in right now, where there's well the officially stated unemployment rate is what, like 3.5%, something like that, which doesn't take into account, of course, workforce participation rate. There's very different numbers in that regard. It was very, very slow, not a lot of work. I was accustomed to getting into a workplace, on days that I was helping people look for work. I was accustomed to getting in there at like 8 o'clock and working pretty much flat out until 5 p.m. Maybe like half hour here and there, or like 15 minutes, but those breaks were taken up doing other things in the area. And then all of a sudden in workforce development, it was like a ghost town. A lot of the people that I was working with, they actually had better employment related skills, or I don't know, soft skills, I guess you call them. They had better soft skills than most people I'd worked with at the charity. Yeah, I don't know. What I found was a really there was a very small portion of the people that I worked with that were absolutely ambitious. They had skills, or at the very least, they had interest in gaining skills, and that was maybe 5% of the people that I worked with. And these are people that really, honest to goodness, just needed a boost of one kind or another.
And when you say worked with, just to make sure we're clear on
Oh yeah,
everything, the people coming through this workforce development agency who are seeking employment, correct?
yeah. These are people that are well, so we had like two sort of broad populations. There were people that were kind of working, maybe like a little part-time or very low pay work, that wanted to get into something better paying, or wanted to increase their skill in some way, gain a new skill, or get a credential or something like that. And then there were what we call dislocated workers, and these are people that had been laid off from a job. Now, obviously, at the moment, we were not getting a lot of those. As of about, I don't know, 8 to 10 months ago, we were not getting a lot of dislocated workers because the unemployment rate is so low, and you know, um,
I've heard commentators claim that official unemployment rate is fake as hell
it is.
because of
Yeah,
various factors like people who've just stopped looking for work, people who are making do, like sort
yeah,
of, let's say you're long term unemployed, but like
yep,
you live with family and you don't have to pay rent or worry about bills, or you're living with a bunch of other people in the same situation, and you've
yeah,
just you just sort of like had it with the economy or whatever, or maybe you got used to COVID bucks, like were you doing any of this stuff through COVID? Did you see any changes because of that? Like, what
Well,
do you,
I didn't actually start in the field until COVID was in full force. So I got laid off about a year before COVID hit. And so for about a year after that, I was just lost. And that's about when I reconnected with the church actually during that time, that year. And then the pandemic hit, and someone from church said, "Hey, this lady over at this charity, she needs help handing out food." And the guy that was asking me, he said, I would go, but I'm not allowed because I'm too old. Because of course the virus was just wiping out septuagenarians in droves. That was what they were telling us at the time. And so he said, I'm not allowed to go. But you're a younger fella. So why don't you go over there? And I was like, yeah, sure. And that's really what got me hooked on, or not, well, it got me hooked on the helping thing. It got me out of my own head and trying to be something that I wasn't, trying to do jobs that were not right for me. It was helping this lady hand out food 3 times a week, basically 3 mornings a week. And then after a while, she said, "Oh, let me hire you." I like I say, I volunteered there, and that was when COVID had started. So I can't really speak to workforce development before COVID. I do, as my coworkers talked to me about it. They said that yeah, it was definitely very different. But I mean, there were so many things that changed at once that it's hard to know. Like, I do know that primary unemployment number they give us is absolute horseshit. Because, pardon my language.
no, go for
Should
it.
I? Is
Go
all
for
right.
it.
It's bullshit because it doesn't take into, well, so there's this other term, labor or workforce participation or labor participation rate, which I'm sure you've run into. And they break it down by different populations, age groups and races and genders and all that stuff. But basically our workforce participation rate is its lowest that it's been. I don't know if it's ever, but it's pretty darn low, at least within the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years or something like that. So yeah, we have a lot of people that they just fell off. I mean, frankly, you're not included in that main unemployment number. If so the 3% or whatever they give you, you're not included. I'm pretty sure you're not included in that if you've exhausted your unemployment benefits. If you're not filing for unemployment benefits anymore, you're not included in that. That's what that number really is the number of people that have filed for unemployment insurance. And when I was unemployed, I was so confused by the unemployment system. And this is why I say I'm kind of a dumbass, but I was so confused by the state of Maryland unemployment system. I gave up on filing for it. I never got a dime. So there are a lot of people that just don't bother with it because it's humiliating and confusing and demoralizing to try and get unemployment money.
Wow, this is all news to me, and
Oh,
part of
really?
the reason I brought you on.
Well, you've never been unemployed.
No, I mean,
If you can drive a truck, you can get work, right?
yeah, well, yes, but there's
Yeah.
deeper issues with that. But
Okay.
like, part of it's just, I don't know if it's just me or a pride thing, but like, I want to say I've never been laid off from a job ever. I mean, I've been fired from one. I've worked seasonally where the expectation is you show up, you work for a couple months, and then it's done and dusted, and all that's fine. The only time I ever had trouble finding a job was in late 2008 after the crash. I
Yeah.
had been traveling that summer in Europe, and I came home and everything had sort of fallen apart while I was gone. And it took me, I don't know, it took me a couple of months to find a job. The guys I used to work for were really slow. They said they
Mm.
could hire me back, but I would only get like one load a week or every 2 weeks, which wasn't going to be enough. And I never filed for unemployment. I mean, I always saved money when I worked really hard, and it just something about it struck me as like, why would you file for unemployment? Just work hard, find another job. Maybe that's my own Puritan work ethic programming I picked up from my dad and the rest of his family as a kid.
Yeah.
But I have no idea how any of this stuff works, which is why I'm
Yeah.
enjoying speaking with you about it.
Well, I'm glad. But yeah, obviously every state, like I say, every state tends to do these things differently. And even just the rate that they award unemployment or like the I don't know. So I'm pretty sure in Maryland, it's like the max you can get is like 40% of your weekly that you were making when you were last working. And but that's like 40% with a ceiling, obviously. So if you were making like, I don't know, say someone was making 100 grand a week or whatever, and they get laid off, it's like you're not going to get 40 grand a week from unemployment anyway. But so they have like a cap and everything. But in Maryland, it's so they have like two websites that they use to run unemployment. And this is the first huge mistake, in my opinion, of how they run it, is that they have two websites that supposedly talk to each other in some way. They have a website called Beacon that is sort of the nuts and bolts, the financial info, that's where you enter your if you want direct deposit with your benefits, you enter your bank account on there. You file on there. That's where you actually do your filing for unemployment. You put like, yes, I looked for work this week. No, I didn't do any paid work. I didn't collect any, pension money, whatever, all yada, yada, yada. That's one website. And then they have the Maryland Workforce Exchange, which is a separate website, completely like, different URL, different look to it and everything. The Maryland Workforce Exchange is all in red because our hideous state flag, and any other Marylanders are probably going to want to crucify me for this, but the Maryland state flag is hideous. Red and yellow and black and white. It's look it up. It's hideous. But it's all those colors. And then Beacon is white and blue. And so it's yeah. Anyway, they're two separate websites. Maryland Workforce Exchange is where you go. Now they do have a handy search engine on there, so you can look for jobs. It's like, say you're looking for a job as a forklift operator, you can go to their search engine, type in forklift operator. They give you like 10,000 or more results for whatever that is. Well, however many there are out there. And employers can register with that exchange, with that website. They can register their job openings and cultivate relationships with that website so that they can get their results in there, or their postings and stuff. Anyway, but that's where, on this separate website, that's where you log your work search activities, because you don't just get unemployment for asking for it. You have to prove that you're looking for work, and you have to prove that the jobs that you're looking for, that you have submitted applications to them. So through Maryland Workforce Exchange is where they have the jobs, job contact and reemployment activity log. And so you put in, you have to do 3 of these things. And I believe one of them, at least one, maybe 2, has to be a job contact, which is either an application or an interview. And this is every week. Wow, and you can also take little seminars that count as reemployment activities.
So what I'm hearing here, creating a couple of questions. Number one, 2 separate websites. Like, do you think that's done on purpose to cause confusion and or dissuade people from applying for these benefits? And 2, this one website you're talking about, where you have to log all of this search activity and find jobs, and ostensibly they're recording every time you enter into it with your information. So it kind of acts as a quasi surveillance system so that they can keep tabs on you being unemployed. You don't even have a job yet, and they're already watching you. Maybe that's a little bit like out in the maybe I'm being paranoid.
It is absolutely no. I will tell you, because I had a login for the back end of the Workforce Exchange, and it might still work for all I know. I'll tell you, local and state governments. Oh shit! Ran into my drill. But local and state governments are very. This is not comforting, I imagine, to a lot of listeners. But your state and local governments are sometimes not very careful and punctual about permissions management, access management to various amounts of data. So I haven't checked to see whether I can still get in on the back end of that system, but as of about a month ago, I was still able to get in. Anyway, but yeah, they absolutely monitor. They can tell when you've logged in. They can look at the IP address from which you logged in, and that is absolutely. I mean, they literally are. It's almost explicitly stated that it's surveillance, because yeah, they're seeing if you're looking for work or whether you're just sitting on your hindquarters collecting those unemployment checks. And you won't get the check, because that second website, the one where you log your reemployment stuff, supposedly, and usually does. I've seen it fail, but more often than not, it works. It talks to the first website, and so when you go to file your unemployment on the first website, Beacon, when you go into that website, it'll say these are the reemployment activities that you did last week. Are these accurate? Do you have any more to add? Yeah. So supposedly they do talk to each other, but explaining that to someone who's like, I had never been on unemployment before. And so when I applied and everything, of course they explain it to you, but like it being my first time doing it, I was not reading that stuff closely. I didn't understand that I had to do I just thought I had to look for work. And I was applying to jobs like crazy, but I wasn't getting any unemployment and nobody ever asked me.
You know how on Twitter there's just all these bots all the time, and Musk, even though he's taken over, hasn't managed to get rid of them, and there's just, there's all kinds of weird automated fuckery that goes on the internet, right?
Yeah.
I would think that the people that make and manage those bots and scripts and programs, you'd think, I'm just thinking of an opportunity here. Make one that like automatically logs you in for all of this job search activity, and then charge the unemployed like a subscription fee. Like, hey, give me $20 and
Now that's smart.
I'll make sure you never have to log in. I'll write a script bot to keep so the state thinks it's surveilling you, but it actually isn't, because it's a script that's just doing everything for you. And you go and smoke weed or hang out or do whatever you're going to do. I mean, I don't know. I'm just
That's a
enter,
real
enter,
opportunity for somebody.
enterprising mind,
Absolutely. No, that would be a real opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I thought at first you were saying why don't they make that kind of bot that the state unemployment agencies would use? And I was like, that goes back to your first question earlier. They don't do that because they don't want to give out unemployment insurance. They don't want to give that money.
No, of course
No
not.
state unemployment agency wants to pay out. They want to make it as humiliating and discouraging a process as possible to get that money, because what they want, and I mean there's something to this, it's that they want you to get back to work. They want you to be out there making, a productive contribution to society, in some way or another. They want you participating in the economy actively rather than collecting unemployment passively, which I get. But at the same time, there's no similar incentive structure on, say, capital gains, which is also passive participation in the economy. Like they don't put that kind of limitation on that. It's just the stuff that like poor people need, that they make it a real pain in the butt to get. And unemployment is, it is insurance. It's not a benefit like SNAP or something like that. SNAP is, SNAP, right? Food stamps.
Yeah.
But it's not a benefit like that. It is something that as a worker you have paid into. It is insurance, and so I don't think it's ethical to make it like, we don't make it basically impossible to file an auto insurance claim. There's insurance agencies that handle your auto insurance. So we have unemployment insurance. So it should be, where's my freaking mascot? That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
Unemployment insurance.
it should at least
Give
be.
me an emu.
It should have a similar ease of use, and you shouldn't be shamed or confused. I mean, you could compare it to health insurance, which has its own,
Ugh,
Byzantine bureaucracies and incentive structures that everybody likes to rightly complain about. But yeah, you're right. Like, if you paid into it, it shouldn't be a problem to get back out, especially if you're forced to pay into it by the state.
that's
But
right.
as the point you made about, they want you to get back to work, this comes to my sort of central question of where this unemployment, trying to get people jobs and stuff, filters into the trucking business.
Oh yeah,
Because
yeah.
I've been studying academic work on it, and there's this meme in the trucking world about the driver shortage, which has been around for a while and has been pretty thoroughly debunked. But
Yep.
deeper than the driver shortage meme is the why, and how is it that we can keep turning over people all the time and nothing
Hmm.
ever gets done about it. And at the bottom end of that, there always seems to be fresh meat. And
Yep.
there's various ways in which that fresh meat is channeled into the trucking industry. And at the bottom end, that means going through a CDL school. And
Hmm.
from what I've heard from you, there seems to be quite a component of that from these workforce assistance programs run by municipalities and states.
That's right. Yeah. That was like CDL training was like the number one thing that people came to us for. So the way that people would come to us was they'd file for unemployment, and then they'd one of their options for one, I was talking about those reemployment activities. One of their options was to attend our like an orientation session, which was online. They used to be in person, but everything, of course, has moved online. But they can attend these orientation sessions about our services, and in that they learn about, like, oh, okay, so there's this money that is set aside by the federal government called used to be called the Workforce Innovation Act or something like that. Now it's WIOA, WIOA, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. But they learn about this funding, right? And this funding it comes from the feds, and then it filters down to the states, and then that down to the localities, depending on how each state does it. I think some of them are pseudo private entities, the workforce organizations locally and stuff, but depending on the state and all that kind of thing. But anyway, it's this big bucket of money that comes down from the federal government, and they learn about these training opportunities, and the training opportunities run the gamut from obviously CDL training, both Class A and Class B, but you can also get training in, I don't know, like project management professional. So if any of your white collar listeners, who I would identify myself as one of them, I'm kind of a hick, but also I recognize I'm a white collar guy. But yeah, if you've gotten laid off and you want to look into upskilling, you look into your local workforce organization, because you can get the feds to pay for you to get project management professional training. Or if you want to get into IT, you've never done IT stuff, but you're good with computers and stuff, look into IT training, because there's various training programs in CompTIA. I don't know what it stands for, but it's this CompTIA. So they have A plus training and Security Plus and Network Plus. That's your entry level tech training to become a tech support guy who picks up the phone and says, "Have you tried turning it off and back on again? Okay, bye." That's your entry level training for that. And you can make good money doing that. That's your entry level into that field. But as you go from tier 1 and upward, I mean, you don't need a college degree to work IT tech support. And you can get pretty darn far in that field without any kind of college degree. If you're at least a little bit good with computers, you can get this training and make your way into that. So that's all these different trainings, and medical stuff. If you want to be a CNA, you can get your training in being a certified nursing assistant. You can get phlebotomy, which is the spike in the vein stuff. So they have all these different training programs. But out of all, like, I would say, I think I had about 80 or 90 different training programs on one big spreadsheet that I made. But I had, just spotty other people, or all the other things, all the other different types of training. I had maybe one or two people for them. And then probably 80% of the people that came to me wanted CDL training, and they almost all wanted Class A CDL training. And these are people that have never done any commercial driving before. They've just heard there's a driver shortage. Drivers get paid ridiculous sums, is what they hear. They hear that a Class A driver gets like 90 to 100 grand a year. Yeah, right. I see you grinning. They hear that commercial drivers, Class A, semi drivers, they're like, oh yeah, you get to be your own boss, you get all this stuff, and they're
So
like, that's what I want to do.
They've been implanted the narrative, as it were. Was there any other avenue by which they'd heard about this other than all of these blatantly false and patently disprovable stories they heard about trucking? Was there anybody else incentivizing them to look into this?
I'm not sure, I'll be honest with you. I mean, so like mostly a lot of people, it was like, oh yeah, my brother drives a truck and he's been doing that for 20 years, and now he has like a little fleet of his own. The one young lady I was working with, she said her older brother had, it was like 4 or 5 of his own trucks that he hired drivers to drive. And she was like, and he's making great money. I was like, yeah, because he's a business owner. It's not the driving that's making him that great money.
Well,
Uh,
he's a,
but
he's a successful kulak, and many such cases. There's lots of smaller guys around that do all right. But I think
yeah,
the primary beneficiaries of the sort of CDL complex, as it were, are a
are
lot
the
of
big guys.
the bigger carriers where some of
Yeah.
these folks end up. I was wondering, in in your capacity as
Mm-hmm.
a workforce, placement guy trying to help these people out, and they come to you and they're either they want some suggestions or they have one in their head already to be CDL driver or project manager or whatever. Was it part of your purview to maybe act as a screener and feel out whether or not these folks would fit the particular jobs they were looking to get into? Like, was that an official part of your job, or maybe just something you had in the back of your head that maybe that's not for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question because sort of on an official basis, so we were supposed to evaluate whether a position had demand, labor market demand. That was like one of the biggest factors. Obviously, we had like a sort of a basic skills assessment that we made everybody go through, and that was to see whether someone had sort of well, and this is basic reading and math skills. So we're not actually assessing whether someone can drive or not, but we're assessing basic skills. So that between those two things and our kind of holistic, just sort of subjective evaluation of the person, is this someone that can succeed at the thing they want to do, at the thing they're saying that they want to get training in? And then there were people that were just a lot. Like I had right before I left that organization, I had two people right in a row that were had just been laid off and had been mortgage bankers, and they've been doing it for like decades. And mortgage banking, I mean, we think of it as like, oh, I work at up in New York City or whatever at Chase or one of those things. No, these were people that were like, small time local. They just kind of wrote up mortgages. But the two people that have been doing it for 20, 30 years, they were both laid off right around the same time. And these are people that like they've been mortgage bankers for so long, it's like they can't even imagine doing anything else. And so in that case, it's not like, oh, is this person fit for this? Now, this is one where I was actually counseling a guy. I was like, you have people skills. You're of an age where people see you as trustworthy and yada, yada, yada. This was a guy who was perfect for Class B CDL work. He could have, driven, you know, charter buses and or trash trucks or whatever. He was like a gentleman. And I know all truckers are gentlemen. But no, he was a good dude, and clean record, obviously, for days. If you're going to be a mortgage banker, you can't have dirty record and everything. But and he was hesitant about it. But I was like, no, you know how to drive. You've been driving for like 30 years. So let's get you into this Class B thing, and you can do that off and on. As you phase into retirement, you can come back for a couple weeks at a time or work a couple days a week or whatever. Anyway, but yeah. So to answer your question, I'm sorry, I tend to go on tangents. To answer your question, the primary considerations were, can they do the job like on sort of a basic skills level, and is there labor market demand for the job? And that was really, and when it came right down to it, you're gonna go with the path of least resistance in these situations. So like I had a young lady that was just absolutely insistent. She wanted to do Class A CDL training. And I was like, here are some reasons why that might not work for you. She's got like 3 kids at home. She's a single mom. I was like, that's gonna, are you gonna bring them along? Right. Like, and some of them are babies, like they're not like grown kids. They're like little kids. But and I was like, maybe this isn't the right time for this. Maybe this isn't the right version of this field. Like you could get into logistics and not drive a truck. But when it comes right down to it, if they're really insistent, like this young lady was, it's like, all right, we'll move ahead. All right, let's get the
and
paperwork
and
going
what
because
and what does moving ahead look like? So what's the actual actions and procedure when you take someone from you and then put them to the world of CDL schools. How does that look?
Right. Well, it's be honest with you, by the time I don't think I had gotten anybody to that point. I was in I was in that field, or in the government version of that field, for less than a year, 6 months about. I don't think I ever actually moved somebody on, but as I understand that process, we coordinated with the training provider, and we got the check sent to them, and then we just kind of turn the job seeker loose and say, okay, go to this school and take your truck
So
training.
your agency, you just said you send the CDL school a check.
Yeah.
So the agency is taking that pot of money you previously
Yep.
discussed that comes down from on high from the feds, and
Yep.
now you're cutting a check to a CDL school
Yep.
based on in-person interviews with
Sometimes in
someone,
person.
sometimes online, yeah,
Yep.
who your primary consideration is labor market demand, whether they can count and read, and
Yep.
having never seen them operate equipment or drive a
Oh
vehicle.
gosh, no. Now, no, one thing we did generally get
I just
them
want to make
to
sure
give
I've got
us.
this I've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
this straight, because like this is sort of how I understand it in like my
yeah.
negative view of these things, and I just want to make sure that
There's a little bit more nuance to it, actually. So yeah, I should probably include that. So we had one guy that did most of the CDL stuff amongst our little work group at my location. He always made them get driving record from the state. So state, gives you the report of the driving record. He made him get that before he would sign off on sending him to the trucking school. And he also ran on his own time, or he didn't pay to have it done or anything, but he would run a background check, a quick, not even in Maryland it's case search. So he'd run a Maryland case search on somebody's, because a lot of employers, they'll say they'll hire you regardless, or they say that a criminal record doesn't disqualify you from employment, but
on paper.
when it comes right down to it, they're going to pick the one without a criminal record. But yeah, so those were a couple of other steps. Yeah, send me your driving report and send me, and I'll do a quick. But yeah, that's really, we certainly never saw them operate a vehicle. In fact, one young lady, she came to drop off some paperwork or something like that, and it was like 2 days before Christmas. And she dropped off this stuff, and I was like, I'm sorry, can you come in? I need you to sign some stuff. And she, she came in, and when she went to leave, her car was dead. Like, the battery was dead. Apparently, she had just been jumping her car every time she wanted to go somewhere. She was just getting a jump. And I was like, you probably want to get a new battery if you're having to jump it every time you want to start it. She's like, oh yeah, I'll do that eventually. And I was like, and I'm gonna now, the upside with her is that she was trying to defraud the government, and ended up not getting a penny out of us. So other than a whole lot of time and effort, but she had
Wow.
already been in training for 2 months when she was trying to convince us to pay for this school. She was like, oh yeah, she, at no point did she acknowledge that she was already in the school. So that was a big thing for us. We're not going to send a check. We're not going to pay for anything, you know, well, we don't pay after the fact. So you don't go through the school and then come to us for the money after. It's like we pay up front, and then you go through the training. But anyway, yeah.
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there any accounting oversight with the amount of money? I mean, you had this
Oh
example
yeah.
of this fraudulent person, but like in total, like a bigger picture accounting of all the money that goes through your organization, all of the training programs
Yep.
you do help people with finance for, and is there, do they analyze the success rate? So like people that
Oh
have
yeah.
been to your organization, got that money, moved on to a job, do you follow up with them like 6 months later, a year later, like to see if they're A,
Yeah.
still in that job, B,
Yep.
if the money was well spent? Like, is there any of that going on?
Tons of it, actually. Yeah. And this is, sort of, you hate to give them credit for it, but part of the funding from WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, requires that workforce organizations make a sort of a best effort for follow-ups for a year after the person exits the program. So it's not just a year after they go and start their training. It's after they've completed the training. You're supposed to follow up with them quarterly and find out, are they still working? Or for one thing, did they find a job? Are they still working? What are they making at their job? That kind of thing.
So you
And
are you are collecting this data.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you're making a best effort. Some people just don't answer their freaking phones or emails.
Oh, so
So
it's self-reporting from the folks that received the assistance.
yeah, yeah. Well, you are allowed to. There's sort of back end ways to find this out too. So like you're allowed to contact who they report as an employer. They technically sign a release for that, I believe. I never got this far because, like I said, I was only there for a certain amount of time. But you can also they gave us. So this is an interesting thing. We had a back end access to. I was telling you about those two unemployment websites. We had back end access to both of them. I call it back end. It's we had sort of ability to see records and things like that. So
You had your
uh,
own portal.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah, so I was able to through Beacon, the blue and white blue and white website. I was able to see what they call wage reports for people. So I could go in, and when I was doing, I would do these follow up things for coworkers sometimes when when they would ask me to, and so I would go into the wage report and I'd say, okay, this person exited the program at this date, and I could look at their quarterly wage report, how much they made in that quarter, and who they'd gotten paid by. Um, and so that's another way that we did the follow-ups. It was sometimes you call, like, if you couldn't see anything on Beacon, you'd try and call them, and say, hey, what's up? Why aren't you working? Do you need a hand? Can we give you help making a resume? Can we give you some interview tips, things like that? Because that's another thing that we did. It wasn't just this WIOA funding. We were helping people with, yeah, like I say, resumes and things like that. And sometimes, I mean, I was a lot of time I was so bored, I would sit there and type in applications for people. It was
oh
just,
wow.
yeah, I mean, because well, some people that would come in there, if you're I don't know, like 60 years old, you've only ever had like warehouse and retail jobs. How much do you really know about a computer? Because you're used to filling out, like, if last time you applied for a job was like, I don't know, like 1999, and now you're looking for work in 2023. Your applications you filled out on paper, and now you got to type everything in. So that's the kind of person that, if they weren't applying to work with computers, I'd type in their applications for them sometimes, which I almost always did have the time. So anyway, but yeah, so we would follow up on this stuff. And there's rigorous analytics about the rate of employment after getting the training, on what people are making after the training. And a lot of that is actually publicly visible. At least for the state of Maryland, I can say, if you go into if you look for what they call it, the Maryland Eligible Training Provider List, ETPL, you could just, I mean, honest to goodness, just search for Maryland ETPL. There's like a list of all the eligible training providers in the state of Maryland, and so you can look at each one. And a lot of the time, now not all the training providers have this, and so eligible training provider would be like a trucking school, and you can look. They give you metrics for like percentage of people that graduate the program or that complete the training, percentage of people that are employed at quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. So there is metrics, but I was surprised by some of the providers that the data was like way out of date on there. Like some of them, it was like they didn't have anything since like 2015.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate that info. Couple of examples. There's a lot of washout with trucking
Oh
because,
yeah,
people come to you or they go to a truck school recruiter directly. However they get there, they come to find out that it's not as it was advertised. They
yep,
spend a few weeks or months out on the road, and then the sort of non work aspects of the job get into their head. Time away from home, frustration, the sort of, the psychological warfare that goes
mm-hmm,
along with being considered useless. Like, you show up at some distribution center, you sit there for 6 hours waiting to get unloaded, you don't get paid for it.
mm-hmm.
After so much of that, people start the internal dialogue questioning the choice they've made. a friend of mine and fellow trucking Twitter guy, runs a podcast, my buddy Justin. When he got into trucking, he went to Schneider's own trucking school. I can't remember how
Hmm.
he ended up in it, but the day he showed up, he was in a class of 87 people. The
Yeah.
first After the first few hours or couple of days, like when they test your medical stuff, there's a bunch of hoops you have to jump through to qualify, and people started getting dropped immediately. And then there's several weeks of training, and then they go out on the road, and there's only so many people that actually graduate the program. And 12 months later, after all of that, Justin, out of 87 people in that class, was the only one still trucking.
No way.
That is one hell of a washout rate.
That is,
And
yeah.
and in this book that I
Yeah.
reference often, Big Rig, Trucking in the Decline of the American Dream, by a fellow Pennsylvania guy, Steve Viscelli. He teaches at UPenn in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
He studied the labor market economics of trucking for 10 years to try and figure out why all this stuff is happening. I mean, it was published in 2016. Factors are a little different now, but he found the same thing. The washout rates were just incredible. And,
Yeah.
your agency and the government in general are focused on labor market demand. They're focused on this question: where does the economy need people? But
Yep.
I get the impression they're not following up on the why they need people and
Yeah.
looking at these washout rates. And I would imagine this probably applies to other jobs. Like we're always forever talking about migrant farm workers and all these Mexicans that come here, and it's like, okay, cool. Why do these jobs suck so bad that locals won't do it? How many of those people are washing out? It wouldn't just apply to trucking, but like trucking's a pretty egregious example
Oh
because of
yeah.
this narrative of a driver shortage, and they just keep turning through people all the time, and nobody ever stops to ask why. And I think the
Bingo.
government, if they're going to keep shoveling money at organizations like yours, and it's not necessarily bad, like people need job training and they need opportunities. That's not necessarily the problem, but like the effectiveness of this, so that you don't have to maybe spend so much money, and maybe if it acts as like a perverse incentive, right? So,
A
you
hundred
know,
percent.
I like to call it stealth corporate welfare. And it's stealth because it's not thought of as such. But the trucking companies become so dependent on these training regimes being subsidized in some way by the government, but that subsidy isn't looked at in that way. It's called job training. You're helping people,
Yep.
so therefore it's good. It speaks to the American, proclivity. Everybody has to have a job. Everybody has to be employed. It's like the number one thing anyone ever think about: jobs, 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 which is fine in and of itself, but you have to have some criticism of the system, where the money's going. And like, if the job sucks and it's costing the taxpayer all this money to keep throwing people at it, maybe like we have an incentive to say, hold on a minute, maybe these people who claim to be free market, these corporations, these big trucking companies, need to tighten up their own operations, so they're not constantly going through these people who are, like, in an underhanded sort of way, are being given money by the government in order to finance all this.
Right.
uh,
No, I,
is
I
does
I hear
that
you.
does that like, in your experience in that field, does anybody ever ask these questions? Like, do the
No,
people above you, the
no.
managers, the people between your agency and the feds, is anyone asking this question at all?
I can't speak to the people between my agency and the feds because I was bottom rung. I was entry level, but I can definitely tell you that the incentives for management, and I had a very top heavy management structure. I think I don't know, it's the old joke that that office space me. I have 9 bosses, Bob, and I did. I don't know about 9, but I had a very dense structure of management above me, and nobody was asking about, are we actually meeting labor demand? Are we actually is what we're doing, are we doing what we say we're doing? I guess there was very little of that. It was all about, and it's intuitive in terms of give me the performance incentive, or give me the performance metric that you want. Well, the government wants us to do so many referrals to services from the WIOA thing. They want so many referrals to that. Okay, fine. We'll get you all of those that you want. Everybody that comes through, we're going to refer them to WIOA services. That's as simple as it is. It's, we'll find ways to make the numbers work out. And so that's all our management. They were very tunnel vision focused on, and leadership in particular was very, like, with tunnel vision focused on just those specific metrics. And the question I kept asking that kind of, ruffled some feathers is, how would we get truck drivers if how would we train, how would truck drivers become truck drivers if we were not sending people to these CDL schools, and quote schools, as you call them, CDL mills. And it was a very sensitive, I mean, nobody ever answered it, basically, because I think that what they wanted us to think was that without the CDL schools, there would be no truck drivers. And it's like, but that's patently false, right? Because these things haven't existed forever. I mean, we had truck drivers for a long time before there were CDL mills in every town.
Yeah, the training regimens were much different in the past. There's some people that are going to come through it organically, like I did, because my grandpa
Mm-hmm.
was a trucker, my dad and my uncles were truckers.
Yeah.
I kind of fell into it, and I didn't go to a CDL school. I learned
Yeah.
on the job. I worked at a trucking company after school when I was in high school, from the bottom up, greasing trailers, fixing flatbed decks, helping
Yeah.
mechanics. I kind of learned it through osmosis. And something interesting, I don't know if you're still in that area, but under the Biden Infrastructure Act, whatever that got passed
Mm-hmm.
here a year or two ago, they're trying to do this thing where they are going to build an apprenticeship program for CDL drivers, specifically younger ones if you're 18. And there's been lots of criticism of that and discussion about it, but I'm going to set that off to the
That's the
side.
best way to learn. Oh my gosh, apprenticeships are, they those were like the flagship thing. Like so I see this all over the place. Apprenticeship models are for almost all jobs, not just trucking. Like, well, if you look at graduate training, like training for people that are getting a PhD, it's apprenticeship. You take some classes here and there, but mostly what you do is you do scut work for your graduate advisor. You do their dirty work. You run all their experiments. You do all this stuff, and in exchange, you learn from them. And by the time you're done with that apprenticeship, you're ready to, become a journeyman, and then you're ready to become a master and stuff like that. But you're, instead of crafting, horseshoes and stuff like that, you're crafting science or scholarship and stuff. Anyone who's been to school for something will tell you, okay, I learned a few things, but my actual training was when I started doing the job. On the job training is absolutely, yeah. So I mean, if Biden actually came through with an apprenticeship model for learning how to drive a truck, that'd be like one of the like two good things I've seen the dude do.
Well, I mean, the devil is always in the details, and
Oh,
I would have very specific recommendations for how that looks. From what I've read and what I've seen, maybe not structured the way I would do it, but I don't know.
yeah.
But one of the points I was trying to get was another thing
Oh,
they're
sorry.
doing is they're making it basically, I don't want to say illegal, but they have closed off in a way the old model of on the job
Oh,
training like I did, because they've now made it a requirement when you go to the DMV to actually apply for your government issued CDL. You are not allowed to do that unless the person you trained with is registered with the government and has passed their own requirements to be a CDL trainer. So like I could go, like somebody could go and learn from their dad or whatever and have years under their belt of riding around. That doesn't, they don't recognize that. The informal training is no longer recognized. You must go through someone who has met these requirements. Now,
so
I
he made
don't,
it worse.
well,
He made it worse. The
in
bill makes it
in
worse.
a way, I don't know how that's all going to shake out, but what it does do is it basically funnels people into, it forces them into going through the sort of CDL school area because those are all the people that are certified.
Yeah.
Uncle Bob that's been trucking for 30 years probably isn't going to go back and get CDL trainer certification just to train
Right.
two of his nephews, right? Like
So it's
it's
another
just it's
corporate welfare.
well, I don't know about corporate welfare, but it's
No, it is
certainly
because the corporate
it's
welfare was the funding these CDL mills through the WIOA funding was one form of corporate welfare. That's the stealth corp, and now they're funding the trainers themselves by like essentially making it so that you have to. Oh, hi,
yeah. This is Georgia. She just woke up.
hey Georgia. Oh, she can't hear me because you're on the headphones. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just make faces.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I don't know.
Yeah,
You might want to call it corporate welfare. It's an unnecessary barrier to entry that it further entrenches the cartelization of the CDL
yeah,
school system, right? It just gives them another advantage over previous informal systems. Now, mind
yep,
you, I'm going to play devil's advocate for why they've done this because there are a lot of dodgy operators in the sort of trucking school industry, fly by nighters, guys that like might they might be that kulak that's got 7 or 8 trucks and they're also having a hard time, and maybe they just throw people in and hope they get their license, and then
yep,
they're not doing a very good job either. That's definitely a possibility, but I don't know that completely closing it off to everybody is the answer to that. And
yeah.
as I said, I had some recommendations for how an apprenticeship would work. And one of my recommendations would be that we institute a graduated licensing system.
Oh yeah,
And many other countries do this: Australia, New Zealand. I think in the UK and Europe, there might be one as well, but I'm not sure. But like in Australia and New Zealand, you cannot just go to truck driving school and skip straight to getting their equivalent of a CDLA. You must have a CDLB for 1 year. You have to
yep,
hold that license. I've heard from my friends in Australia that they don't do a very good job of tracking whether or not you actually did any CDLB trucking in that year. But what it does do is a lot of the freight companies in Australia have these really interesting distribution systems where all the interstate stuff going from like Brisbane to Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, in between all the cities, they have distribution centers of their own where the guys coming in with the B doubles, the single trailers, they come in, they unload, and then everything goes on little trucks to get delivered. And all those little truck guys is where they mostly get their candidates to be big truck guys. So it
yeah,
does actually create those two tiers, and it forces people to be trained for at least a year on that CDLB before you graduate to CDLA. And the problem we have here in the United States is that it's backwards. So
yep.
you go to CDL school, however you got there, if you paid for it yourself, you took a loan from the school, you went to the government and had them pay for it, they throw you off the deep end and you're OTR right away. And then what happens is after several years of experience, maybe you try and graduate back to working local so that you're home every night and you can be with your family. And that's actually hard because all of those jobs are actually the desirable ones.
Yep.
And because you're home and you can actually
Hmm.
participate in your community. And something a lot of people don't know, and this is not part of the narrative they sell to the people who come to you, is that the local jobs, and this is really terrible, the local jobs actually pay less because there's this like ingrained mentality in the trucking industry and how it pays is that it's a benefit to be at home. Oh, you
Yeah.
get to be home every night? We're only going to pay you 70% of what you used to be paid or 50%,
Yep.
right? The really disgusting thing about it is the cost of the truck is the same. The operating cost of a truck that drives over the road or a truck that like circulates around a local area is exactly the same. The fuel cost is the same. The insurance is the
Hmm.
same. The truck payments are the same. All of those costs are exactly the same. But if the driver's arrangement with that company stipulates that they're a local driver, boom, they just cut your pay. It's
Yeah.
just an understood part of the
Yeah.
financial mechanics of the industry, which is perverse because
Yeah.
usually what ends up happening is the local guys are the ones that have gone through the filtering system of going OTR first, discover
Yep.
that that lifestyle is not for them, and then they try and go local, and now they're taking a pay cut. And the only reason they're taking a pay cut is this perception that, oh, you sleep in your own bed every night. It's
Yeah.
it's it's completely ass backwards, and I mean it has all these associated costs. Um, a lot of truck drivers who are new cause most of the accidents. There's been studies done on this that like experience is a factor in it's some ungodly number of collisions and incidents which take place, and that's like there's a term called externalities where
Hmm.
a company or an industry are not carrying the cost of their operations because that cost is now being carried either by insurance companies or society at large, because they just don't care about the effects of what they're doing has, right? And there's nobody forcing them to do that. So anyway, pardon the rant.
Yeah. No, no, no. It's fantastic. That's why I listen to your show. Yeah. It does seem like, I don't know. It seems like everybody is getting away for the taxpayer to all the big players are finding ways for the taxpayers to support them. Is the trucking companies getting support from the taxpayers in that they don't have to train their truckers anymore because they got these training mills that do it. It's the training mills themselves are getting support from the government by arrangements that make non-truck school arrangements, whether it's a trucking school through a trucking company itself or through the school, or it's the only arrangements are now through this funnel that the government has created, and all these funnels are ways for money to go to certain players, and it's certainly not going to the drivers, and it's certainly not going to the customers even, like the people that the drivers are delivering to. It's money that's sucked out and given to, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no,
But
no, and again, there's exceptions to this rule. If you're in a niche trucking market like hauling hazardous materials, fuel, something that's a bit
yeah.
more specialized, you can still have a local job and it'll pay all right, and then sometimes it'll match OTR or exceed it in a small number of cases. But again,
Hmm.
you don't make rules for the exception, right?
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned something earlier which is related to trucking, forklift operators. Every
Oh yeah.
distribution center, every warehouse, every refrigerated warehouse, every way we move freight in the supply chains, not only does that material go on a truck or a boat or a train, it gets handled often
Hmm.
many times in that chain, coming in and out of the container, in and out of a trailer, throughout a factory or distribution center by forklifts. And one of the questions I got to get somebody from the distribution center industry on one of these days, because it's specifically in the freight market, like van trailers moving stuff on pallets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those guys get abused the most of their time because they're always waiting at distribution centers, which throughout my entire career in trucking and for as long as I can remember, just have never got their shit together to try and get trucks moving faster. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
some players in that market who do, again, a small minority, but we
Yeah.
have this detention time thing. And maybe can you speak to like forklift operator as a job title and where that fits into what you were doing?
Forklift operator is it's basically so like forklift certification. I don't know if you've ever had it. Um,
Yes, I have.
yeah, so like not a ton goes into getting forklift certified, right? Like it's not like it's not like a school, like it's basically somebody shows you how to work the forklift, you do some stuff with it, they make sure that you know how to do the stuff, you know how to answer like the questions on a little quiz, and that's forklift certified. So I think I don't necessarily think that the professionalization of that, like creating a centralized authority for forklift certification or forklift licensing, I don't think that's necessarily the answer, because every warehouse is going to work a little bit different. And I don't know that you could have a central training authority or training standard even for that. I didn't actually work with many, and maybe this is an expression of the labor market for forklift operators. I think I only worked with one person that was a former forklift operator, because and in his situation, he was checking boxes. Like he could have gotten a job working a forklift overnight. He got laid off from some job, and he was like, I could get a job working forklifts like probably tomorrow. He's like, I want to keep collecting unemployment until my disability comes through. The guy he had like a terminal disease. So it's funny, but not funny, but funny. Not terminal. I shouldn't say. He did have a legit debilitating disease. He had
Right. Could I go on a minor tangent here and maybe you can help me confirm this because it's something I've
sure.
heard and read and I don't know if it's true, but that there's an ungodly number of people in the United States who are on some variation of long-term disability assistance,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
from the state or the feds. Like, can
Oh
you
yeah.
speak to that or the numbers at all?
Yeah. I'm not sure about the numbers exactly, but there is a form of and I don't know that it would even be called long-term disability. It's under our Social Security Administration, Social Security disability. There's a form of that disability that is probably the easiest one to get, because getting disability is not necessarily easy in this country. It's interesting that and this is a bit of a side tangent here, but as they closed off pathways to collect welfare in the United States, at the same time they did that, all of a sudden a whole lot more people were applying for Social Security disability, because there is a subset of the population that's going to find a way to collect money without working. Honestly, like that's also the capitalist class, or whatever you want to call it, the investment banker class, or whatever. But anyway, so but there's this type of Social Security disability where you get I think it's probably regionally locked. I'm not sure about that, but it was like here in Baltimore, the greater Baltimore area, I think it's like 850 or something like that a month, that you collect. With that amount that you're making, you're allowed to work up to 20 hours a week. If you work more than 20 hours a week, you start losing your disability. Or not the disability itself, you lose the disability benefit. But there are a ton of people that have this, and I've worked, and not when I was in the local government, but when I was at that little charity, I would say more people than not that I worked with had this form of benefit, had this like 850, 900 a month that they were collecting. And they were like, yeah, I want a part-time job on top of this. And I would go through everything. I would, I jumped through every hoop I could for these folks, because I want them to be making better money. You can't really live on that much. I mean, maybe if you got 3 or 4 people like that sharing a small apartment, maybe you can make ends meet, but it's real hard to make it work with that much a month. And so I was like, okay, I want this person to have a better life. And so I jumped through all these hoops. I even had people that I'd come in on a Sunday, and work with them on like a Sunday afternoon, getting all their onboarding paperwork done. And then they wouldn't show up for the job, or they'd show up for the job and, piss off the wrong person and get fired on like their first day, or they'd show up late and all this stuff. And I'm like, what is going on with this? And I had one very, very honest man talk to me. He's like, Joe, I'm going to stop wasting your time trying to get these part-time jobs. Said, because nothing, and he was a former addict, or a recovering addict, I should say. And he said, because I'm starting to realize that this Social Security disability is just like the stuff I used to use. There is nothing that tops the high of getting this free money. And well, I mean, obviously getting drugs would be better. But he said, in terms of like, working, it's like, why would I like, and he says, I find myself at these jobs and I'm asking myself, why would I do this 5 hours of menial labor washing dishes? I get 800 some dollars a month for doing nothing except convincing a doctor that I was partially disabled. And so, and not to sound like a arch conservative here, but that form of disability payment or disability benefit, it really, instead of a safety net, it does end up being, I mean, the analogy fits, it ends up being more of a hammock, and instead of a safety net, and like
If I might make like
yeah.
a broad stroke implication in this question, what percentage, how much of the people that came through your organization would qualify to be part of what Marx called the lumpen proletariat. Like people that are like, maybe that arch conservative boomercon type person that listened to Rush Limbaugh might call them a no hoper.
Oh,
The people that are just like, not to be judgmental, but like they're just not cut out for work at all.
I don't know. It's tough to say. Like by the time they got to me in that location, probably about half of the people that I worked with, and that was at the charity. Now, when I was at the workforce development agency or department or whatever you want to call it with the local government, that was almost none. Those were people that were work ready. They had skills, they had transportation, they had their business together enough that they could make it to places, and they had their paperwork. Like these were work ready people.
They were
Now,
they
when
were
I worked
they
at
were
the
trying. They had it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They were making the effort. Whereas the people that I worked with at the charity, those were people that were, I mean, almost none of them had cars. They were almost all relying on public transit and the shoe leather express, as they called it. Those were people that, yeah, I'd say probably at least half of them were like, I'm not like a theory guy. I've never read a page of theory in my life, but from what I understand of the lumpen proletariat, as you describe it, yeah, it was probably about half or more. And the thing is, a lot of them weren't originally that. That's the crazy thing. People would graduate into that category. It seemed like because I was looking at the work history of this one guy. He was a merchant marine for like 25, 30 years. He had served in, I believe it was the Korean War. Very much older fella. He had served, I think, in the Korean War, and then had gone right into merchant marines. He did that for 25, 30 years. He had a nice little retirement, and then when he ended up with me, it was because he was like, well, I need more spending cash. I want to be able to give more presents to my grandkids and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But and then I didn't see the guy again for about 6 months. And when he came back in, he was in a real bad state. Well, it turns out he had met some woman and started using again. Because I guess when he was much younger, he had some kind of opioid habit, and
Oh
he'd met
boy.
some young woman and had started using again. And so he rapidly graduated. I mean, now I don't know, maybe it was age plus disease and stuff, but I saw a lot of examples of people that had great, I wouldn't say great careers, but had stable careers. I'm trying to think of a better example. Oh yeah, a guy who had been working at a hospital for like 15 years as like a dietary clerk, which is that's the person that brings you your tray of food. An incredibly important person in that operation, even though hospital food is the butt of many jokes. It's still, you got to eat while you're there. And this dude had done that for like 15 years, but because of addiction and various challenges surrounding that, he basically graduated into an unemployable population, or someone that, yeah, that work was just not going to work for him. And we kept trying different things with him. I mean, he was yeah, we tried to put him in stuff like other hospital roles like patient transport and things like that, but he couldn't finish the training for that stuff because he wouldn't show up because he'd be on the nod. It was depressing to see the way these communities have been hollowed out. And sometimes sometimes it was someone that just made bad choices, but a lot of times it was also just yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I can see there's probably a whole other crossover tangent we could discuss for hours about recent economic policies, opioid epidemic,
Yep.
what's gone on in rural America. That's a
Oh
whole
God,
other
yeah.
show. That's a whole other
That's a
that's
whole other podcast.
that or years of study and discussion. But
Yeah.
man, thank you very much for all of this.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. I appreciate you having me on. It's like I say, it's been great listening to you. It gives me a little more insight into the, now that I'm no longer in workforce development. I'm still helping with employment stuff, but it gives me a little more insight into that world of and like I said, I'm a white collar nerd. So it's nice to learn a little bit more about sort of the real world out there.
Well, I mean, there's what we hear out in the zeitgeist, and there's narratives, and there's things that somehow get sometimes or often enough are mislabeled as common sense or common understanding, which can be based on misinformation, to borrow a term from today. And
Yeah.
one of the things, again, I've been in the business my entire life, and I'm just trying to understand why it functions the way it does. And there's an old guy way of doing that, which is just yapping with other truck drivers at the truck stop, or a warehouse,
On the
or
CB.
on the CB, wherever. And I mean that will also box you in to
Hmm.
a certain type of discourse and discussion that's not taking in other outside factors or other study, which has led me to read guys like Vishelli and Michael Belzer, and I'm going to be speaking with Karen Levy here soon on her book on data driven, which is all the surveillance stuff that's been coming on. And there's just all these
Man.
different factors which affect the business. And like I say, I'm trying to, cut through the narrative nonsense and find out what's actually going on. And having someone like yourself who's been part of the training complex and putting people
Yeah.
into the meat grinder that's trucking has been very enlightening and very helpful to that. And I appreciate
Glad.
your time.
Yeah, I'm glad. One other thing I did want to mention, I helped a guy who had already been through one of these diploma or not diploma, CDL mills. I helped a guy, he was trying to study for his test, his CDL test. And I saw through his training documents, and I think they even had a website, a sample. What are they, that electronic device they put in the truck that makes you log every friggin' thing you do every time you
Oh,
take
an
a pee, every
electronic logging device, ELDs.
ELD. That's it. Yeah. And I saw that thing and I was like just the training version of it that they had for him to use. I was looking at that thing and I was like, this is insane that they are tracking. I was like, oh yeah, there probably should be some level of oversight, blah, blah, blah. That's what I'm thinking in my head. I think if most people saw the number of button pushes, so to speak, that you have to make on those, well, not you, because I don't think you have to use one at your current gig, but the number of button pushes people have to make on those things, I think most people would be like, this is insane. You have no respect for truck drivers. I think people just have no idea how much of that like surveillance and like, I don't know, like bureaucratic nonsense is
Well,
involved in truck driving.
it's a form of infantilization
Yes.
that's downstream of the fact, and this is a whole other podcast, about like
Yep.
high trust versus low trust societies, the safetyism, the influence of
Mm-hmm.
insurance companies. I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on, but yeah, the ELD mandate looms large in all of this as well, and maybe that's if somebody in your position, I mean, you're not doing that exact job anymore, but if someone's
Yeah.
working at a local employment agency funded by the state, the feds, whoever, and so many of the people coming through your door are getting shunted to CDL mills, maybe in the interests of transparency and honesty, they should also tell people, by the way, as part of the deal with this job, there's going to be this little screen in the truck that you have to report to and it tracks every move you make. It tracks when you go to sleep. You have to enter all this information in it. If it's not correct, the government can give you a fine, and it's on and tracking you everywhere you go. Maybe that might dissuade people from coming. But again,
Yeah.
if you did that in an employment agency and actually spoke truth about what you were getting into, you'd probably get fired because now you're not actually moving people to jobs. But
Yep. That I think that's very much the case. Yeah. The other thing, I'm sorry, and I'm remembering stuff that I had wanted to bring up,
no,
but
keep going.
this is there's a ton of variability in those CDL. Like there are legit CDL mills, and then there are programs that actually do seem to be geared around creating a driver or training a driver that is ready to go on the open road. And there's the two extremes that come to mind for me. There was one school that was out right near where I worked that they would have 100 or more students in one classroom online. So honest to goodness, yeah, a large portion of their training was just what we're doing now, but with 120 or whatever faces on the screen at the same time. And or not even their faces. I'm sure. I'm sure it was just the instructor's face up there, and that was a ton of their training. Was just, and of course they were the lowest priced one in the area. And they had frequent enrollments, and so they in addition to, so they had basically the perfect setup to cycle our money in and out of there, or not out, our money into there, and not necessarily train someone that was even ready to drive. I think they had very little actual road time. It was almost all this online stuff. So that was one extreme, and then there was another school that was, not even all that far away from us, but this place cost twice or more than twice our allowance. So we had like a $5,000 cap that we could pay for a training course with, $5,000, and only for clock hours, never for credit hours, which doesn't matter. It's meaningless distinction for now. But anyway, but this other place was more than twice that. I think they were like 12 grand or something like that for their training. And it was a long training. It was like 36 weeks or more. It might have even been, it might have been even closer to a year than that. Anyway, but included in their training was a classroom section. And then they had, I think it was like 6 months worth of supervised on the road training. So sort of like that apprenticeship model that we were talking about. 6 months of not enough of an apprenticeship, obviously, but 6 months of on the road, supervised on the road driving experience. And granted, that's, that they're paying for that. Obviously, the students are paying.
That's fantastic. Well, yeah, I mean, another way, it's not all corporate welfare.
Yeah.
There are systems where you as the trainee will sign on to a loan given to you by a credit company that's also owned by the trucking company or the
Right.
CDL
Yeah.
school, but comes with significant strings attached, 25% interest.
Yep.
You're locked into working for these guys. I mean, I guess that's an arrangement. It's not something I would sign up for.
No.
But the example you just gave sounds to me like trucking's no longer very well represented by unions. That's another
Yeah.
discussion. But the LTL section, like guys like Yellow Freight and all that, they're organized by the Teamsters, and the Teamsters are heavily involved in that, like who gets to come work there, right? They are involved in the training, they are involved in all that stuff. A friend of mine just sent me an ad recently from where he lives down in Virginia by one of these LTL freight companies that is unionized, and it looks more like what you just described, and they actually pay you.
Yeah.
I think part of that though is that you have to sign up to become a Teamster right away, so
Yeah.
there's that component of the contract. But that's what we would like to see more of. Like somebody with their eyes on you for the first 6 months. You go home every day so you don't have the stress of like thinking about your kids or your life or whatever.
Yep.
You're on the other side of the country after you've only done a 6 week course and then got turned loose running the road. That
Yeah.
6 months being in the seat with somebody next to you, slapping you every time you do something wrong, and downloading their lifetime of driving experience into
Right.
you while you're learning. That's the model that we'd like to see more of. It's just
Yeah.
unfortunate that example you gave is small
Oh,
percentage.
yeah. And it costs a lot. And the crap, that was like the best program. They were the gold standard. They're the gold standard in this area. I mean, how about because people know I'm in the Baltimore area, I'll go ahead and give them a shout out. Allstate Trucking, Allstate Truck School. Fantastic program, great reputation, and they really do prepare drivers. Now they do charge more, but they are unfortunately the exception rather than the rule, like you say. And the other good programs that I hear about sometimes, some of them are good, are at community colleges. So like, I'm trying to think. I think it's one of the community colleges in this area is known for having a really good CDL training program, and they're more affordable because they're partially government funded in the first place, and then the money from the federal government can help to cover the rest. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
I've been meaning to get on. There's a a community college near me, Broome County Community College, which is more over towards Binghamton, and then there's a statewide community college, more skills trades training network called I think it's called BOCES here in New York State. And there's
Okay.
a BOCES school where there's a guy who organizes a truck show every year in
Oh,
Norwich, New
nice.
York, and he's working with BOCES on their training program in an advisory capacity. Him and a bunch of good old boys that sort of think
Nice.
like me and want to see the industry get better. Unfortunately, this gentleman's notorious at not answering his emails, so I
Ah,
haven't
yeah.
got him on the show yet. But
Yeah.
to be determined. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for your time, man. We've gone like an hour and a half on this, which is amazing.
I was worried I wasn't going to have enough for half an hour, man. I
No, man.
appreciate
What
it.
once you get rolling, it's very easy to bring out the content.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, yeah, great talking to you, and I'll catch you around.
All right, man. Way of the road, Bubs.
Oh, and I don't have anything to promote except if you haven't been to church in a long time, drop in. It might be better than you remember.
What a great message for a Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
Take care,
Joe.
brother. Bye bye.